Potentially not. And it's back. Hello, everyone, and welcome to the first lunchtime event of Pursuit 2022, What Are We Searching For? I hope you enjoy your sandwiches and you're enjoying watching if you're at home, watching on the live stream. My name is Dorothy. I am a third year studying law at Trinity Hall, and it is a delight to see you. You are so welcome here. For whatever reason you've come, whoever you are, it is so great to see you and to spend this lunchtime together. Pursuit is a week of lunchtime and evening events taking place this week, Monday to Friday, including performances, interviews, talks, music, poetry, and free food, exploring the stuff of life that we spend our time seeking. We'll have events on meaning, on community, on perfect, on justice, and on hope. And today's big pursuit that we're thinking about is the pursuit of meaning. So both today, now, and later today at 7 p.m. in the evening, also right here, we'll be exploring meaning, the pursuit of meaning, why we do it, how we do it, and everything around that pursuit. This particular event that we're having now is an event all about, is there more to life than being happy? We'll be thinking about questions such as whether how happy we are is a measure of how successful our life is, whether our value is in how happy we are, whether happiness is really what we're pursuing. If so, how do we get there? If not, what are we pursuing? We'll be thinking about these questions and more in the following event, which will essentially look like a short talk, then there'll be space for a Q&A, and then actually this building will be open for a couple of hours afterwards. So do feel free to stay and continue conversations and questions. There'll be free hot drinks later. So that'll be what's going on. A quick few details in regards to just some practical things. If you're going to need the toilet during the event, there's a toilet there, there's an accessible toilet around the back, and there's toilets, a lot of toilets up the stairs. If you would like a quiet room at any point, just to get some quiet, peace and quiet, the sign will lead you there. It's just upstairs above the toilets. The toilets are downstairs. So that's today. I'm now going to introduce Niv, who is speaking today. So you want to come up, Niv? Apologies, the sign has just dropped. Sorry about that. Niv, who are you? What do you do?
Great, it's lovely to be here. My name's Niv. I'm ordained in the Church of England, so I work for a church in Southampton, and I'm also one of the university chaplains there.
Cool. And Niv, a particularly interesting thing about you is you were once at Cambridge, is that right?
It's relative. That might be interesting to you, I suppose.
Right.
There's more to me than that.
Yes, okay, fine.
Yeah.
What were your Cambridge stats?
I was at Clare studying English. Yeah, I loved it. And I sang in the choir, and that was a really big part of my life. And I enjoyed libraries a great deal.
Great. Glad you do. And what do you miss most about Cambridge now?
There are so many things. I think I miss the hair I had when I was here, but maybe that's not Cambridge specific. I love that you can walk around and people are saying absurdly intellectual things. I was walking here, actually, and past an open-air kind of seating cafe place, and someone said, but of course at this point you need to develop autonomy. And I was like, that just isn't what I hear walking around Southampton.
Yeah, right, fair enough. Great, over to you, Niv, and Niv's now going to do the talk for us.
Fantastic. It's so good to have you join us, or whether you're watching us on the live stream. And today, as Dorothy says, our question is there more to life than being happy? That's a huge question. And there might be all sorts of things you want to bring to the discussion that I might not even talk about in this little talk bit first. So please text questions in. I think it's up on the screen. There's a QR code. Add your questions. We'd love for this to be a discussion this afternoon. Now, when we talk about happiness, I think about one of the happiest moments I've had in the past, say, 6 months. And it was going to see a theatre production based very loosely on Peter Pan for 4-year-olds and under. My wife and I went, and to be fair, it wasn't exactly compelling drama. The actors, while very gifted, were clearly not talking to me, and yet it was one of the best experiences I've had for years. And that's because while it wasn't my cup of tea, it was absolutely what my 1.5-year-old daughter enjoyed. And for about 40 minutes, she didn't wriggle, she didn't cry, which is a miracle in itself, but she sat in our laps, absolutely enraptured by the light and the colour and the sound and the music. And my wife and I stared she'd ever seen them before as she just took it in. And she was so happy that we were so happy. And I've often thought from that moment on, what more could I want for her than that? And maybe that's how you feel about our question. What more could we want from life than to be happy? What more could anyone want from life than that? You might know the US Declaration of Independence and that famous statement that the pursuit of happiness is a basic human right. And it feels like that to us, doesn't it? But it's also a slightly double-edged statement because, of course, it is the pursuit of happiness that is that right, not actually happiness itself. And that's because happiness is a complicated thing, isn't it? Just think about the things that make me happy but might harm other people. How do we feel about that? No, you don't want to go around policing other people's happiness, but none of us want to stand by if others are getting hurt. And then you wonder, do we know how to get happiness? Because there's no reliable formula for it, is there? Actually, in so many ways, you can find yourself surprised by happiness, completely taken aback by something you didn't think would make you happy, but there you are, enjoying it. Or you can find yourself banking on something to satisfy, and then it doesn't quite live up to it. Do we know how to get happiness? And after a while, if you find yourself pursuing but not always finding, you end up asking, do we even know what happiness is? One of my favourite TV shows is all about talking cartoon animals. It's on Netflix, and it's called Bojack Horseman. I don't know if you've seen it. It's brilliant. But there's a moment where one character says to another, doesn't say that. There's a moment where one character says to another, that's the problem with life. You either know what you want and you don't get what you want, or you get what you want, and then you don't know what you want. We're all in pursuit of happiness, but will we find it? And should we be? Is that the thing to pursue? All of us believe that happiness involves trade-offs, the chosen unhappiness of hard work, which we buy into because we trade it for getting where we want to go, being successful. The chosen unhappiness of avoiding delicious food and embracing grueling exercise because we believe it'll make us happier and healthier people. That is not a trade-off I've chosen to make. But those are obvious trade-offs. What about when the trade-off is harder, less easy to spot? What about if we get it wrong? Do we know what the right happiness is? Because some of the ways to happiness that we're choosing are mutually exclusive. To ask this question another way, what good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? That's a question asked by Jesus in the Bible. And he's raising the possibility of emptiness. What if you got everything you dreamed of, but it turns out that your dreams were too small? What if there were a part of you, call it your soul, that craves more than this world knows how to offer? 90 years ago this year, Aldous Huxley released his book, Brave New World. Don't know if any of you have read it, but it's a brilliant novel asking exactly these questions. It shows us a society in which unhappiness has been dealt with and put to one side. And society and individuals in it conform not through the blunt instrument of violence, but because everything has been chemically managed. Everyone is genetically engineered. And so disease is banished. All the old taboos are transcended. And sensory overload means that everyone is distracted. Everyone is kept in a state of happiness. And Huxley is asking, would you say yes to that happiness? Would you say yes to that happiness if it involved the exploitation of others? Because that's actually a big part of Brave New World, which is a pre-World War II novel and all the more chilling for it. There's genetic engineering as some of the superior Alpha Plus people get to enjoy conversations like this, but the Epsilon minus people end up working in the sewers. Huxley says, would you say yes to that? Actually, the novel focuses on a character called John the Savage. And he's not named that because his comebacks are particularly brutal, but actually because he was born outside the Brave New World, on a reservation where things are as they were in the past. And the novel climaxes in his encounter with the controller, Mustafa Mond. Huxley in the novel is holding out two extremes. A happiness that is chemically achieved, that no one chooses because they've been genetically engineered for it. Or the happiness of John the Savage, pursuing meaning, pursuing freedom. And they have this confrontation near the end of the book. The controller says that in the sanitized society, everything is convenient. And John says, "But I like the inconveniences." "We don't," said the controller. "We prefer to do things comfortably." "But I don't want comfort. I want God. I want poetry. I want real danger. I want freedom. I want goodness. I want sin." "In fact," said Mustafa Mond, "you're claiming the right to be unhappy." "All right then," said the savage defiantly, "I'm claiming the right to be unhappy. Not to mention the right to grow old and ugly and impotent, the right to have syphilis and cancer, the right to have too little to eat, the right to be lousy, the right to live in constant apprehension of what may happen tomorrow, the right to catch typhoid, the right to be tortured by unspeakable pains of every kind." There was a long silence. "I claim them all," said the savage at last. That's the knife edge under our question. If we somehow manage to force everyone to be happy, what would that cost us? Another novelist, Margaret Atwood, said this about Brave New World. She said, "In a world in which everything is available, nothing has any meaning." If happiness were chosen for you, what would you lose? Now, some people would say nothing. It might feel like you lose something, but actually you wouldn't lose anything. Because on one account of reality, human happiness is just brain chemistry, actually. There is no capital G good towards which we're all striving, and so capital H happiness is an illusion. It's just brain chemistry. Some neurons fire up and one part of the brain lights up and you're happy. Other parts of the brain light up and you're sad. Now, does that make sense of how we live? Well, people say, no, it doesn't matter if it does or not, because that's all science says there is. And so recently, the physicist Brian Cox dismissed the idea that you have a soul, that there is anything more to you than material, physical reality. In fact, he said that the soul had probably been ruled out by experiments. And then he added this caveat, or at least it is extremely subtle, and you'd have to jump through a lot of hoops to come up with a theory of some stuff that we wouldn't have seen when we've observed how matter interacts. Which I've got to be honest, is a little frustrating to hear as a theologian, because that is exactly what Christians have always said about the soul. Christians have always said that it's not a part of material reality, but immaterial. It belongs to the same order of reality as the logic that you and I are using as we have this discussion. Logic, right and wrong, the soul. All of these are not parts of material reality that you can find physically, but they do give order and meaning to material reality. Just because science doesn't detect the soul doesn't mean it isn't there. That's a bit like saying that someone who doesn't speak English must be stupid because in your conversation with them you didn't say anything profound. But perhaps if you could speak to them in their language, you'd be surprised by what they had to teach. There are other languages with which we can explore reality and find out more than simply what we can see at the end of a microscope or a telescope. The surgeon Paul Kalanithi made that point really powerfully. He wrote, "To make science the arbiter of metaphysics is to banish not only God from the world, but also love, hate, meaning, to consider a world that is self-evidently not the world we live in." Self-evidently not the world we live in. Because he's right. I don't know anyone who acts as if the horrors in our world are just illusory. Everyone I know believes them to be objectively wrong. I don't know anyone in the world who really believes that their moments of joy are just brain chemistry and nothing more. Even if we say we believe that science is the only thing that can show us reality, none of us really live in that world. And that's because if reality is meaningless, then all the things we care about are meaningless too. Any happiness that cheats us out of meaning, that loosens our grip on reality, is going to be a happiness that we end up rejecting. And Huxley's novel underlines that. And its staying power is a testament to that. Because there are circumstances in which we do claim the right to be unhappy. There are moments when there is something more valuable than happiness at stake. For example, talk to someone in recovery from an addiction. They are forfeiting a happiness that they could have when they say no to the alcohol or whatever it is. But wouldn't we say that it's worth it? That actually they're choosing something more and better than slavery to chemical happiness? Or perhaps you're here and you're grieving. You will know, if you're in that situation, that happiness at all costs is too superficial a way to respond to the reality of grief. There's terrible sorrow. There's an acknowledgement of what we've lost. And just trying to be happy is not adequate to the reality of what we're going through in that moment. By the way, that's why we can't live with the idea that all our sufferings are just an illusion. Some philosophies have suggested that reality is an illusion, and the problem is that we're too attached. We're attached to things that aren't fundamentally real, and therefore we grieve the loss of them. We've been deceived into thinking they matter. Which makes some sense at some level. It cuts against the consumerism that we see all around us. But does it work when you're talking to a friend who's grieving? Can you really say to them, your problem is that you're too attached? It's all an illusion. Of course not. In circumstances like that, the problem is not being too attached to something that isn't there, but being separated from something that's real and good. And that's the problem with saying that there's nothing more to life than happiness. What about those who aren't happy now, who can't be happy now, who can't afford the happiness that others seem able to buy, who for whatever reason aren't able to feel the happiness they're told is the Holy Grail? What about people like that? Are we saying that they've just missed out? Are we saying that there's no value to their experience? There's another option. What if the ache and loss we feel in grief and pain is reality making a claim on us? If that's true, then we are right not to resist that claim, but to attend to it, to respond to it with more than just happiness, with sorrow, even grief. That's because we were made for more than just happiness, made to respond to the claim reality is making on us. That's why happiness is so elusive. That's why if we pursue happiness and nothing else, we often end up so unhappy. It's almost as if happiness is a byproduct of something else. So what is it? Paul Bloom, a Yale professor, recently wrote about the interplay of suffering and happiness. And his basic takeaway is that without meaningful pursuits, life feels incomplete. What he's saying is that meaning without happiness trumps happiness without meaning. And his banner example is this honest tweet from Greta Thunberg. Greta says, "Before I started school striking, I had no energy, no friends, and I didn't speak to anyone. I just sat alone at home with an eating disorder. All of that is gone now, since I found a meaning in a world that sometimes seems shallow and meaningless to so many people." So where do we find meaning like that? And you notice Greta's not saying, "I invented this meaning. I came up with it for myself, and now I'm happy." No, she's saying, "I discovered this meaning, something real outside of me, and in responding to it, I've discovered something worth living for." How do we discover that meaning? Let's go back to the question Jesus asks and put it in context. This is in chapter 8 of these Mark's Gospels, which you might have to hand. Then Jesus called the crowd to him along with his disciples and said, "Whoever wants to be my disciple must deny themselves and take up their cross and follow me. For whoever wants to save their life will lose it, but whoever loses their life for me and for the gospel will save it. What good is it for someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? Or what can anyone give in exchange for their soul?" Jesus is not promising a shortcut to happiness. He's not even talking about an easy life. He's really honest. He's calling anyone and everyone to follow him by denying themselves, saying no to themselves, and by taking up their cross, which everyone in the ancient world would have known meant dying to themselves. Why? Because Jesus says that's the only way we will ever come to life. He says unless and until we lose our lives for him, we will never find them. And if we keep hold of ourselves and keep him at arm's length, in the end we will lose everything. And so he calls us, paradoxically, to lose ourselves for him so that we can be found. Now, that's a fascinating paradox. But you know, with Jesus, this is not just rhetoric. He actually did this in flesh and blood, actual human history. Read historical accounts of his life, and you'll see him willingly embracing death. A death, he says, is for us. And then rising again from the dead, guaranteeing that nothing that we lose for him is ever truly lost in the end. That's Jesus' challenge. Why take it seriously? Why take him seriously this lunchtime? Well, don't just take my word for it. This week, why not weigh the world-changing impact of Jesus for yourself? Why not see the difference he's made in the lives of those around you and in the world in which you live? After all, nobody has had more of an outrageous impact on history than him. We even measure history around his life. Why not assess that for yourself? Because here's all Jesus had to work with to change the world. He only had 3 years of public life. He only had 12 devoted followers who were pretty incompetent, and one of whom betrayed him. He didn't move about in the Cambridges of the world where there was moving and shaking and learning and influence, but in the unpromising backwaters of the Galilean countryside. He had no money to spend. He had no armies to fight for him. And at the end of that 3 years, the climax? A public, shameful execution. History tells us that is all Jesus had to work with. And yet with that and nothing else, he has changed the world completely. 2,000 years on, 2 billion people and counting seriously call this homeless carpenter's son God. How do you explain it? That's something every thinking person should assess for themselves, should get to the bottom of for themselves. Because Jesus does confirm some of our intuitions. He shows that happiness really is about the right trade-off. And choosing the wrong happiness really will mean missing out in the end. He shows us that there is something about you so precious that not all the world would make up for it being lost. But Jesus also raises other possibilities. That our flourishing is to be found in the God who made us for himself. And that Jesus is that God, come in person, inviting us to discover that flourishing life. That flourishing can begin in him. Because what Jesus is offering is himself and a relationship with him. It's a relationship which gives us room to be real. Because one of the things you discover with Jesus is that he is for you. And he's so gentle when you're not happy and not able to be happy. Those who follow him have discovered that he knows how to comfort us, even in the pain we would never have chosen, that doesn't feel like it's any kind of trade-off. Actually, Jesus is the one who cherishes our tears. He's never the one telling us to bottle it up. He's never putting pressure on us to be happy no matter what. He calls us to know him and to enjoy him. It's a relationship with room for us to be real, and a relationship with room for reality to reveal itself to us. Because Jesus shows that reality is not ultimately an illusion. Love, joy, sorrow, meaning, these are real and worth reckoning with, worth responding to with your life. So the question is, what if you didn't have to choose between meaning and happiness? What if there were a fullness of life in which the two intertwine? And Jesus is offering that to you. Now, the truth is, most people I know live as if that were true. They live as if justice were more than just 21st century opinion. They live as if love were more than just hormones and neurons, but worth pursuing. They live as if the cosmos is not just some accident, but somehow worth investigating and delighting in. But if we banish God, it's only as if. It's only something we're deluding ourselves into thinking. What if it didn't have to be as if? What if it could be because? Because justice is more than opinion. Because love is more than brain chemistry. Because the cosmos is beautiful and not just an accident. And your belonging in it is a wonderful thing. What if it could be because? What if Jesus is the God who made you, stepping into your world, calling you to follow him, even to go the way of his cross, so that you could live, and live forever, and live fully? What if your pursuit didn't have to end in frustration? That's the question this week. Thank you so much for listening. Please do dig into it. Please do text in all the questions you have before we have a moment of Q&A in a moment. And please do see for yourself if Jesus can offer that thing that is more than happiness. I want to take a minute or so to talk in your little tables about that, and then Dorothy will come up with Q&A time. Thanks for listening.
Hello, sorry to interrupt the conversations. We're just going to have a short time now of Q&A before we finish. Just a reminder, though, that if you still have questions and they're not answered, this building will carry on being open, so continue to have those conversations, and do also use the little orange forms you have, which you can find on your tables, and feel free to write questions down and put them in the boxes on your way out if you have further questions that aren't answered. But without further ado, we'll get on to the pigeonhole. Do remember that you can go onto it and upvote, so even if you don't have a question, you can vote for questions that you'd like to be answered. So, Niv, first question that we have for you is, why does finding meaning necessarily mean finding God?
Great question. And can I say apologies to people who've been watching on the live stream. Apparently my mic was a bit quiet, so I'm sorry about that. Might have been a good thing, actually. So why does finding meaning necessarily mean finding God? And I think it's fair to say that actually, I don't think it's as easy as that. I think there was another question on the pigeonhole about whether Greta found a meaning that wasn't in God, and therefore, does that mean you have to have God to have meaning? Let me try it like this. Our choices are between meanings we invent for ourselves and meanings that we discover outside of ourselves that are really there, outside the four walls of human opinion, not just my individual opinion, but other cultures and other sort of, I don't know, historical opinions. Something that is beyond those things, transcends those things. And I think it's fair to say that if you take God out of the picture, and at this point in the conversation, by God I mean the thing that transcends all those human standards, then that meaning can only be something we've manufactured for ourselves. And the problem with that is that that is not good enough when we want to say that good is good with a capital G and evil is evil with a capital E. Not just wrong in a cultural opinion, but wrong full stop. We need to validate the meanings that we're working with beyond us, otherwise it's all just a loop going around in our heads, things that we're saying for ourselves. And none of us live as if that were true. So we're seeking a meaning that transcends all those things. Where do we find it? Now, at this point in the conversation, we could say all the religions are offering some kind of answer at this point, and they are. And it's worth talking about why we would say that Jesus' insights are the ones we privilege over others. But of course, all religions are doing that. All religions would have an apologetic for why you should listen to them instead of others. But at this point in the conversation, all of us are reaching beyond the meanings we make for ourselves, because those are not ultimately livable. Those are not ultimately big enough to make sense of who we are and experience in our world and the preciousness of life and of others. That's why we need a meaning bigger than the one we make up for ourselves. Is that the same as saying meaning is therefore only found in God? Well, at this point, we are now looking at a buffet of options. What would it look like to have a meaning that is beyond us and human opinion? And there are lots of alternatives that people put out there. We could talk about them for a while. I'd love to talk about them afterwards if you like. I guess the big takeaway that the gospel, which is a way of saying the good news of Jesus, is all about, is that that meaning did not stay at arm's length. That meaning for which we were made, for which all of us long, did not sort of fold its arms and sit back, but stepped into our world, showed his face in Jesus. And that is why we ask questions like this in a setting like this, because we want to invite you to see whether the meaning Jesus offers is meaningful, yes, for you personally, but also for our world. So it's a great question, and there are alternatives, non-God kinds of meaning, but I think the problem is, at some point, you're going to have to step beyond the four walls of human opinion, and how do we do that? And the great news about Jesus is that he's stepping in, becoming one of us, becoming like us, to show us the things that otherwise we would just be speculating about. And when I was an atheist as a teenager, that was something I found gripping and had to get to the bottom of. Great question.
Thanks, Niv. The next question that we have is about the phrase losing yourself. So this person asks, what does losing yourself actually mean?
Yeah, it's a great question. Eminem has an excellent song about this, but that might be a bit dated as a reference, and it's nothing to do with mum's spaghetti. There's a sense in which this is a metaphor and a really powerful one. And I think the more you look at the words Jesus is using, he is talking about a fundamental denial of yourself that is not, in the end, a denial of you. And that is hard to describe. So in another account of Jesus' life, written by John, he actually uses another analogy that might help. He says, seeds only ever come to life if they die. If you have a seed, and you put it on your windowsill on a little plate, and you go, I love this seed, I'm so excited about what this seed can be, it'll only ever be a seed. But if that seed dies, if you do something unspeakable and dig up a little hole and put it in there and cover it up, and actually you find that seed becomes the thing it was made to be, a dramatic thing. You get a beautiful flower, you get some amazing fruit. That seed only comes to life if it dies. And Jesus says, that's what I'm talking about. You are like a seed. Until you come to me, until you come and follow me, you will be like a seed left on the windowsill, never ever coming to life the way you could. But die with me, and you will find yourself bearing astonishing fruit, blooming like the most beautiful flower. That's what he's talking about. And for the rubber to hit the road, really practically, that means saying yes to Jesus. He talks there not just about paradoxes, he's saying, follow me. It means every day saying yes to Jesus as the one you follow. And that's something that would change everything for you. But actually, I think, mean coming to life. That's why we put on a week like this, so you can see what that looks like as you look at others around the room, so you can ask your questions so that you can see for yourself.
Thank you. The next question we have is all about objective and subjective values. So this person asks, how can we claim the objectivity of values like morality and justice, while so many consider them subjective? So how can you defend what is objectively just and right against moral relativism?
It's a great question. And I think the fact we're asking that question kind of almost gives you the answer. We have to. Can we really live in a world in which morality is subjective? Can we really live in a world in which atrocities can actually be justified as long as you had another kind of moral framework? Would you be okay with being treated badly because someone else thought it was okay? No, you would want to step forward and say, no, I object to this. I have a problem with this. I don't want this. Okay, but why? Are we just taking your word for it? Is it your word against someone else's? No, that would be such a threadbare account of justice. No, we need something outside of ourselves that can validate our moral intuitions. So actually, if you say that it's all subjective and there's no reality to it, you effectively discount yourself from any meaningful conversation about these things. It's a bit of a shortcut, because if you say it's all subjective, then maybe we will all get along. But actually, it holds real engagement at arm's length. And to put it more bitingly, the philosopher Roger Scruton said, anyone who tells you that everything is relative is asking you not to believe them. So don't. And I think he's right. If it is really true that everything is relative, that sentiment itself is relative, and you're left with nothing. Could you live like that? Of course not. Now, it's true that different civilizations, different cultures will have all sorts of different subjective grasps on truth, on meaning. But that's the point. They're subjective, they're situated, there are no views from nowhere, but at the same time, they are gripping onto something. They do have traction with the truth. That's why you can have the conversations you can. That's why, in your supervisions, you can learn from someone who doesn't already agree with you. That's why it's good to be here, in some ways.
Thank you so much. The next question we have is about, okay, so you said Jesus only had 3 years to work with. This person asks, if he cared so much about people trusting him, why wouldn't he take more time and make it easier to believe? Or why wouldn't he make himself more obvious?
Brilliant. Brilliant question. Why does he make himself more obvious? Why didn't he take more time? Why only one part of the world 20 centuries ago? Why doesn't he make it easier? A really good question. And I think the answer is, what if the thing Jesus came to do was bigger than just prove he exists? Right? Because here's the thing, what we've asked in that question is, why doesn't God do everything to make it really clear that he really exists? But what if God has more things to do than exist? And what if he has more to give you than just the knowledge that he exists? What if something far bigger is involved? That's the question. And if it is, then actually we can understand why God would choose one place to show himself in this way, why God would choose one culture to enter into. And it also makes sense as to why we're having this conversation here in England 20 centuries on, that it's part of his purpose for this good news about what happened in one place could filter out to everywhere. By the way, there's something lovely about that. God cherishes specificity. Somewhere matters to him. You can go visit the Middle East and go to places where his human feet walked. That tells you that this is actually accessible to your historical investigation. So yes, God has more to do than just exist. And so while we could present a very good case to God saying, please do all these things and then we'll really know you exist, he might be saying to us, what if I have more to do than exist and more to give you than just knowledge of my existence? What if I want to stretch out my arms to welcome you into my love? And what if I will find a literal way of doing that costs me so that you can be welcomed in?
Yes, the final question we have at the top of the poll, which is actually kind of related to that, so you may not have much more to add, is essentially, how can Jesus bring meaning today if he lived so long ago?
Great question. And there's a sense in which I hope, if you're studying, you realise that meaning is not pegged to contemporaneity. Just because something is new, relevant, doesn't mean that it's deep, satisfying, and rich. Actually, there's a sense in which the idea that if something is past, it can no longer be true, makes no sense of how we really live. Do you celebrate your birthday? Did you care about Holocaust Memorial Day on the 27th of January, was it? Does it matter to you that you live in part of a bigger story shaped by history? Of course it does. Of course it does. And so the kind of impact Jesus makes at that historical distance is something all of us have to reckon with, whatever our faith commitments. But here is something amazing. There's more even than that. What Jesus is offering is not just really good knowledge about historical things, not just even access to a historical figure like no other. It gets personal. He gets personal. As you open up these accounts of his life, you will find what I discovered looking into them as a skeptic. You'll find him offering himself to you, coming to life, as it were, as you take him seriously, speaking out of the text to you, like he did earlier when he asked that question, what does it profit someone to gain the whole world, yet forfeit their soul? That's not a question we can leave buried in the sands of history. It's a question each one of us are answering today. And the one asking it is present too. Now, for a Christian like me, that's a faith position. I had to say yes and believe that he was to discover it. But it makes sense of how I live. It makes sense of the evidence we find in history. And it actually is an invitation to what I was talking about in the talk, a reality worth living in, where love, joy, sorrow, all these things are real, not just illusions. He can offer it, and he's inviting you to find it in him.
Thank you so much, Niv. That's all the time that we have for questions now. Niv, do feel free to take a seat. as I just wrap up. I just said that you are already sitting, sort of foolish thing to say. Thank you so much, for coming. Thank you everyone else for coming. Thank you for sending in questions, whether you're at home or whether you're in the building today. If your questions didn't get answered, don't let that be the end of it. Do pursue answers. Would love for this week to be a time of seeking out answers and seeking out asking more questions and conversations. And so, as I mentioned earlier, there are a few ways that we can be continuing that conversation, whether you're at home or in the building. So starting off with in the building, there is a bookstall at the back, like literally directly at the back, which has some free books on us, which explore some of those big questions. So there's a book there about confronting Christianity, some of the 12 hardest questions for the world's biggest religion. There's a book there about the historicity of the gospel accounts, so the accounts of Jesus' life, whether they stand up to historical scrutiny. Do feel free to have a look. Maybe use this time that I mentioned earlier that we have this building open for, to have a little look and read of those books. They're over there. You'll also find little feedback cards. Right now you can see them, the orange feedback cards. Do take one and do write down any thoughts. It can be as anonymous as you'd like. There are some boxes on your way out which you can drop them off into. But there's also various boxes that you could tick if you'd like to chat to someone or to ask more questions, to pursue answers to those. So that's books, that's the feedback forms. And there's also the cafe, as I mentioned, where there'll be some warm drinks, some hot drinks that you're free to have and free to stay in this building as long as you like. If you're not in the building, there is a virtual feedback form and bookstall which you'll find in the YouTube description. So do have a look at that, and you can have a look at the books yourself, order them, and you can also leave any feedback. Yes, and there's also more ways of continuing the conversation. This evening, we'll be back here at 7 p.m. for an acoustic night and a short talk on Is There Meaning in the Mess? There'll be performances, singing, piano, poetry. We're really excited for it. So do come along for some refreshments and for that acoustic evening. And then later on during the week, there will be a whole host of more lunchtime and evening events every day on community, on perfect, on justice, and on hope. There's really exciting interviews, talks, and performances at all of those. So do have a look at the website, at the Facebook, at the Instagram pages to find out more. We'd love to see you again, and we'd love to continue having these conversations and asking these questions. So it's been lovely to have you. It's been lovely to have you been tuning in. It's been lovely to have you in the building. See you very soon, and thank you so much for coming.